Function nodes. Now, these guys are really simple. They seem to confuse a lot of users, but there's nothing confusing about them. They are really, really easy. Basically, the function nodes are just like curves in Photoshop. Notice how this little graphic is none too dissimilar to when you've used curves in, well, not just Photoshop, any paint program really. Yep, that's basically all they are. Let's take a quick peek here. So I'm going to take a texture here, procedural texture, and plug it into this plane's surface, and there we can see the texture. I'm going to make it a little bigger just to make it more obvious for us. Okie dokie, there we go. You'll see that procedural textures have this function input. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab, well, we'll grab the gamma node, the gamma function rather. You'll see that by default it's set to 0.5. If I set the gamma to 1, it is linear. And when I plug it into function, absolutely nothing changes. Just the same as when you put curves on an image, and to start out with the curve is linear and nothing is any different. But you see, if I put in, for instance, 2.2 here, then we get gamma 2.2, colour correction. If of course I put 1 divided by 2.2, then we get gamma correction in the other way. So that would be the same as taking something that was in gamma 2.2 and linearizing it effectively, like the whole linear workflow thing. But what we can do with the function nodes that is different than you would have with a normal curve, with a normal curve colour adjustment, you would only ever have a single iteration of the curve. In other words, the frequency would always be 1. Across the space you would only get one occurrence of the curve. So let's set that back to 2.2 here, and I'm going to bang the frequency to 2. You can see the curve now takes up half the amount of space along the horizontal axis here. That's because the mode is constant. I can set it to repeat, in which case it drops straight back down and repeats again. I can set it to oscillate, where I get a sawtooth style oscillation. Of course I can clamp the low values to bring up those bases there, and of course I can clamp the high values there, which will bring those down. So you see, effectively what these nodes do is they colour correct the procedural texture, or rather they give a curves adjustment between the two contrasting colours that you enter into the procedural. And the different nodes are just different presets to the curve really. Here in the bias, see at 0.5 it's nice and even. Let's set that to 0.2. Again, you get this curve going off that way. 0.7 sends it the other way. Again, you can increase or decrease the frequency, the amplitude of course, shift it in phase, which basically just moves the curve as a whole. And that really is all that you've got. Notice here the sign, if you imagine, black to white, black to white. If this was curves, then I'd be bringing my blacks up to 50%, taking them straight up to white, bringing the whole thing back down again to black, where it should be nearly white, and then taking it back up to 50% grey again. Could punch in more frequencies of it. Constant, incidentally, with sine is the same as repeat. We shall notice here, because of course this is a sine wave. It's mapped from the sine function, so constant is always the same. Oscillate, however, does give us a different behaviour. And you can start to see the kind of wonderful patterns that you can turn out with these nodes. You could of course do the same with some of the colour correction nodes, after the fact to the colour output. But let's face it, making a curve adjustment like this or like this would require a lot more fiddling. Doing it here with these pre-made nodes is nice and simple. You'll also notice that some, most specifically here the modulate node, which can be set to different modes depending what you want it to do to the coloration. This is kind of like a blending mode and a curve adjustment in one. However, you can displace that with additional functions, because it also has function input. So notice here how my sine wave is displacing the modulate line here. Why do I have this straight line coming up and these couple of bumps in these couple of places from it? Because the mode is set to maximum. So the resultant curve here in modulate looks at the basic curve, which here is a straight line. It looks at the new incoming function here, and it draws a new curve based on whichever of those two curves has the maximum value in a vertical sense. So of course, up until, see, this curve goes up, then it comes down, and then somewhere around there is where it will intersect with this curve, and then after that it goes below. So by plugging this in here, see what we get? The point of intersection, when this second curve starts to go below this one's curve, then the data from that is dumped. And so of course if we set minimum, we get the opposite effect. The minimum values from either curves are put together. Subtract will subtract one curve from the other. Whoopsie. Multiply multiplies the value of one curve by the value of the other. And add, of course, adds the values of one curve to the other. And we can plug up to 2 functions into this guy. And there you have it, basically. Those are the function nodes. Just like color correction curves, but which work kind of before the procedural rather than after it, if you will. They modify the way in which the procedural's colours are generated rather than colour correcting those colours after the fact. The end results are very similar, but done this way does allow for more malleability. And that's all there is to the function nodes.